All right, guys, welcome to our Saturday reading. We're starting a new book today. We're going to be doing Inventing Reality by Michael Parenti. For those in the chat, just type in stack if you'd like to have your 2 cents added in. All right, we're going to be starting with a word to the reader. For many people, an issue does not exist until it appears in the news media. How we view issues, indeed what we even define as an issue or event, what we see and hear, what we do not see and hear, are greatly determined by those who control the communications world. Be it labor unions, peaceful protesters, the Soviet Union, uprisings in Latin America, elections, crime, poverty, or defense spending, few of us know of things except as they are depicted in the news. Even when we don't believe what the media say, we are still hearing or reading their viewpoints rather than some other. They are still setting the agenda, defining what it is we must believe or disbelieve, accept or reject. The media exert a subtle, persistent influence in defining the scope of respectable political discourse, channeling public attention in directions that are essentially supportive of the existing politico-economic system.
Be this as it may, growing numbers of people are becoming increasingly aware that the media are neither objective nor consistently accurate in their portrayal of things. There seems to be a growing understanding that we need to defend ourselves by monitoring and challenging the misinformation we are fed. In this book, I will try to demonstrate how the news media distort important aspects of social and political life, and why. The press's misrepresentations are not usually accidental, not merely the result of the complexity of actual events and the honest confusion of poorly prepared reporters. While those kinds of problems exist, another kind of distortion predominates, one not due to chance or to idiosyncratic qualities of news production or news people. The major distortions are repeatable, systematic, and even systemic, the product not only of deliberate manipulation but of ideological and economic conditions under which the media operate. One book cannot cover all that might be said about the media. I will concentrate on national and international politico-economic class issues, saying relatively little about the racist and sexist biases in media content beyond what is dealt with in the first chapter. I also do not deal with the entertainment media and the many hidden ideological and political biases found therein. That subject awaits a later volume, so that's the one we're going to be reading next, after we finish Inventing Reality. In the pages ahead, we will explore the way the press distorts and suppresses the news about major domestic and foreign events and policies, the hidden and not so hidden ideological values, the mechanisms of information control, the role of news people, publishers, advertisers, and government, the way patterns of ownership influence information output, and the instances of dissent and deviancy in the major media. Rather than attempt a comprehensive canvassing of the news complete with statistical breakdowns and content analyses, I trace media performance along several basic themes, providing representative samples of how the press treats or mistreats a subject. A more systematic and comprehensive undertaking would have had the virtue of thoroughness and maybe increased precision of a sort, but it would have made for a very huge and dull volume. In any case, numerous systematic studies are cited and summarized in the chapters that follow. This book concentrates on the more influential and prestigious news media, specifically on the 3 major networks: the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, and the American Broadcasting Company, ABC, along with the New York Times and Washington Post and their respective news services. These 2 newspapers, the Post and the Times, not only feed information to the public but to other news media as well. Occasional attention is also given herein to the news weeklies, Time and Newsweek, and the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and lesser publications and broadcast media. Taken together, these various outlets compose what I alternately describe as the major media, the establishment press, the mainstream media, the business-owned press, the U.S. press, the national media, or just the press and the news media. Throughout this book, I use the terms news media and press synonymously to mean the printed and broadcast news organizations. It so happens that press is singular and media plural, but I mean the same by both. The term press, however, does not include the entertainment sector of the media. The above-mentioned news organizations represent the better quality part of the establishment press, being more informative and less distorted than most of the other, more conservative media. If this book has a bias in selection, then it is in the direction of understatement. If the media so preempt the communication universe, then how can we evaluate them? And who is to say whether our criticisms are to be trusted? In attempting to expose the distortions and biases of the press, do we not unavoidably introduce biases of our own? And if objectivity is unattainable, are we not then left in the grip of a subjectivism in which one person's impressions are about as reliable or unreliable as another's? To be sure, there is always the danger that a dissenting viewpoint of the kind presented in this book will introduce distortions of its own. The reader should watch for these. But this new danger is probably not as great as the one posed by the press itself, because the readers approach the dissenting point of view after having been conditioned throughout their lives to the sentiments and images of the dominant society. The heterodox arguments can more easily be recognized as such and are open to conscious challenge. Far more insidious are the notions and opinions that so fit into the dominant political culture's field of established images that they appear not as arguments and biased manipulations, but as quote-unquote the nature of things. When exposed to a view that challenges the prevailing message, the reader is not then simply burdened with additional distortions. A dissident view provides us with an occasion to test the prevailing beliefs, to contrast and compare and open ourselves to information and questions that the mainstream media and the dominant belief system in general have ignored or suppressed. Through this clash of viewpoints, we have a better chance of moving forward toward a closer approximation of the truth. In addition, we have the test of experience itself. Common sense and everyday life oblige us to make judgments and act as if some images and information are closer to the truth than others. Misrepresentations can be eliminated by a process of feedback, as when subsequent events fail to fulfill the original message, the original images. For instance, after decades of mass media alarms about Red Menace threats that subsequently never materialized, we can raise some critical questions about the objectivity and reliability of the press regarding the issue of anti-communism in the Cold War, as indeed I do, see chapters 6, 7, and 8. There is also the internal evidence found in the press itself. We can detect inconsistencies in the press by drawing from other reports in the same mainstream press. We can note how information that supports the official view is given top play, while developments that seem not to fit are relegated to the back pages. Also, like any liar, the press is filled with contradictions. Seldom holding itself accountable for what it says, it can blithely produce information and opinions that conflict with previously held ones, without a word of explanation for the shift. We can also learn to question what the establishment press tells us by noting the absence of supporting evidence, the failure to amplify and explain. We can ask, why are the assertions that appear again and again in the news not measured against observable actualities? We can thereby become more aware when and how the news media are inviting us to believe something without establishing any reason for the belief. Much of the evidence herein has been gathered from extensive and detailed studies produced by academic scholars, journalists, and other independent investigators. Also helpful has been the information provided in such dissenting publications as The Nation, The Progressive, Political Affairs, In These Times, The Guardian, The Daily World, and Mother Jones. publications that have proved right more often than not on a wide range of issues that the major media regularly misrepresent. Some readers will complain of this book's one-sidedness, but if it is true that, quote, we need to hear all sides and not just one, unquote, then all the more reason why the criticisms and information usually suppressed or downplayed by the American press deserve the attention accorded them in the pages that follow. In any case, it can be observed that people who never complain about the one-sidedness of their mainstream political education are the first to complain of the one-sidedness of any challenge to it. Far from seeking a diversity of views, they defend themselves from the first exposure to such diversity, preferring to leave their conventional political opinions unchallenged. A former member of the Federal Communications Commission, Nicholas Johnson, once urged people to, quote, talk back, unquote, to their television sets. We can talk back to all the media a lot better and demand a lot more only when we know how we are being manipulated and why we are being lied to. This book is an attempt at understanding how and why the media are the way they are, so that we might better defend ourselves not only by talking back in the privacy of our living rooms, but by organizing and struggling to become the active agents of our own lives and the creators of our own reality. Anyone have any comments they want to make on that first section? Go for it, Kami Rice.
So that part where he was talking about how, like, who owns what papers and such kind of, like, influences what they like will publish, reminded me of this article that got posted in, I think, the Washington Post, like, within the last couple of days, where this like CEO was talking about how, like, working from home is ruining work culture because people used to, like, come into the office and do all these extras that weren't part of their job duty, and if they're going to act like this, then maybe she should just turn them into contractors. And it's, like, so, like, blatantly anti, like, worker, and yet it was, like, this op-ed that was just posted in a national paper, you know, with, like, clearly no one had thought about any of the repercussions, because it's essentially, like, it's at least towing the line on what you're allowed to do as far as, like labor laws and, like, the union organizing, but, like, it was just posted with, like, absolutely no, like, thought about it at all that it might be a problem because it was somebody related to the owner of the paper, you know. So that just made me think about that.
Yeah, we are going to see Parenti touching on some similar topics throughout the book. So, it's a good observation. And Jamie says, I am further convinced that spooky, scary socialists debunking every anti-communist argument ever is just a summary of Parenti's writing. Yeah, it probably is. At the end, he put up the argument, you're just biased, and was like, yes, you're right, so are you. Do you complain when anti-communist stuff is biased? Yeah, gotcha. Alright, so, does anyone else want to read for a couple minutes for the beginning of Chapter 1?
I can do that.
Alright, awesome.
From Cronkite's complaint to Orwell's oversight. The mass media in the United States are privately owned, profit-making corporations, like so many other institutions in our capitalist society. To understand how the media function, we need to understand a few things about the capitalist system itself. Most of the land, labor, natural resources, and technology of this and other nations are controlled by a few giant corporations and banks for the purposes of making profits for their owners. This process of capital accumulation, the essence of the capitalist system, in turn exerts a strong influence over our political and social institutions. The news media seldom talk about this, and we shall see why, but it is time we did. Capitalism and culture. The capitalist class, that tiny portion of the population that lives securely and affluently, principally off the labor of others, has a commanding say in how and for whom the wealth of the nation is produced. The imperatives of the private market determine the kinds of jobs that are or are not available. the wages we earn, the prices, rents, and mortgages we pay, the quality of the goods and services we get, and even the quality of the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink. Capitalism's purpose is not to create jobs. In fact, capitalists are constantly devising ways of eliminating jobs in order to cut labor costs. Nor is its purpose to build communities, for capitalists will build or destroy communities as investment opportunities dictate. Nor is capitalism dedicated to protecting the family or traditional life, for no system in human history has been more relentless in battering down ancient practices and destroying both rural and urban homegrown cultures. Nor is capitalism intent upon protecting the environment on behalf of generations yet to come, for corporations will treat the environment like a septic tank in order to cut production costs and maximize profits without regard for future generations or for the generation enduring it all today. Nor can we say that capitalists are committed to economic efficiency as such, since they regularly pass on their hidden diseconomies to the public in the form of overproduction, overpricing, pollution, unemployment, population dislocation, harmful products, and personal injury. And as the military budget shows, they actively court waste and duplication if it brings fatter contracts and bigger profits. Capitalism has no loyalty to anything but its own process of capital accumulation. No loyalty to anything but itself. Nor could it be otherwise if one wished to survive as a capitalist, for the first law of the market is to make a profit off other people's labor or go out of business. Private profitability rather than social need is the determining condition of capital investment. Throughout history, the accumulation of wealth has brought with it a growth in organizations designed for the protection of wealth, starting with the bands of armed men for whom Engels correctly defined as the essence of the early state. Marx and Engels understood that the state has several functions. It carries out tasks that cannot be performed privately, and it tends to the common defense of the people. But a major purpose of the state in class society is to protect those who own the wealth of a nation from those who labor. It may come as a surprise to discover that throughout most of the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries, leading bourgeoisie philosophers and economists understood and openly stated, as did John Locke in 1690, that government was created for the protection of property. And Adam Smith in 1776, that civil authority is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or of those who have some property against those who have none at all. As class differences become more and more pronounced, Smith observed, so does the need for a state. The acquisition of valuable and extensive property necessarily requires the establishment of civil government. And as the scope of capitalism widens, so does the state. From principality to confederation, to nation, to an international network of counterinsurgency client states, in order to make the world safe for capital accumulation. Even within a political system like ours, which allows for mass electoral participation, the rich are able to exercise an extraordinary influence over the leaders of government. In fact, they usually are the leaders, directly occupying the top legislative, judicial, and executive positions, including governorships, cabinet posts, and the presidency itself. In addition, the immense sums of money at their disposal allow them to dominate both political campaigns and the policy-making process with lavish contributions and well-paid lobbyists. Even more important, business as a system, as a way of organizing property, capital, and labor, is a pervasive social force, and not just another of many interests in the political arena. It occupies a strategic position within the economic system. In a sense, it is the economic system. So, on most major politico-economic issues, business gets its way with government because there exists no alternative way of organizing the economy within the existing capitalist structure. Because business controls the very economy of the nation, government perforce enters into a unique and intimate relationship with it. The health of the capitalist economy is treated by policymakers as a necessary condition for the health of a nation. The goals of big business, rapid growth, high profits, and secure markets at home and abroad become the goals of government, and the national interest becomes identified with the dominant domestic and overseas capitalist interests. In order to keep the peace, business may occasionally accept reforms and regulations it does not like, but government cannot ignore business's own reason for being, that is, the accumulation of capital. In a capitalist system, public policies cannot persistently violate the central imperative of capital accumulation. Sooner or later, business as a system must be met on its own terms or be replaced by another system. I vote other system. Today, knowledge of the relationship between wealth, class, and state is suppressed like a dirty secret. Or it is dismissed by official opinion makers and news pundits as just so much Marxist ideological mouthing. The acceptance posture is to minimize or deny the linkages between capitalist economic power and a supposedly democratic state, between private wealth and public authority. But in truth, the power of money prevails over the needs of the people in more ways than are usually acknowledged, and the existing state can no more be neutral toward and independent of those who control the economy than can the other institutions of society. But what has all this to do with the press? The press is one of the other institutions I just alluded to, and one of the most important in maintaining the hegemony of the corporate class and the capitalist system itself. During the 19th century, as industry drew a growing proportion of the population into its sphere of work and consumption, business leaders became more concerned with seeking that cultural life coincide with the demands of industrial production, and that the public's political sentiments were supportive of the existing social order. Not only would industrialists administer the work discipline of the machine, they would try to teach people proper attitudes and loyalties. They would extend their influence over people from the factory to the political halls to the community itself. Anarchists, socialists, syndicalists, and other purveyors of radical ideas were mercilessly hounded out of the factories, schools, professions, and communities of America. Pinkertons, Klansmen, and vigilantes, often in the pay of the bosses, along with police, militia, and the army, were regularly deployed to crush labor opposition and political dissidents. But as Napoleon once said, you can do anything with bayonets except sit on them. A class that relies solely on the state's bayonets to maintain its rule is never secure. So along with suppression, the business class enlisted to its cause such other institutions as the church, the charities, the law, the schools, and the popular press to secure their hegemony as captains of industry. Businessmen, as Stuart Ewan wrote, aspired to become captains of consciousness. All right, let's see what we got in the chat. Alright, Zoriel, burn this paragraph into y'all's brain. It summarizes a lot of the important parts of Marx and Engels. This is the essence of the bourgeoisie nationalism. And
That's why y'all didn't know 15 current Congress critters sit on the boards of corporations. That doesn't surprise me either. Did anybody have anything to talk about? And put stack in the chat. And I might call Zoriel back. Oh, the number? I would assume it's probably... I wouldn't be surprised maybe if they're not actually sitting on the boards either. Like, it's family members. It's also, you know, their little upper clique that they have. All right, go for it, Zoriel.
So, yeah, those 15 Congress people, those are the ones who are on corporate boards concurrently with their tenure in Congress. So they do both actively at the same time. They are both making our laws and sitting on the boards of these corporations at the exact same time. Usually they do those two things subsequently. So they run corporations, then they have their tenure in Congress, and then they go back to the corporations. So these are just the ones who are doing it at the same time. So that's all.
Alright. Yeah. Like how Pelosi's husband has hundreds of millions in real estate. Yeah. It's all interconnected. Like, anyways. Alright. So you coming back to read, Zoe?
Alright. Also, man, Orwell was crap, but the phrase captains of consciousness, I mean, there's not really a better word for it than Orwellian. So, today corporate leaders and their well-paid deputies dominate the boards and top posts of society's educational, communicational, artistic, entertainment, legal, and scientific institutions. These institutions are ruled very much like business firms themselves, by boards of directors, or trustees or regents as they might be called, drawn mostly from the business class or those in pay of that class. Numbering between 10 and 25 persons, these boards have final say over the institution's system of rewards and punishments, its budget and personnel, its investments and its purposes. They exercise power either by occupying the top executive positions or by hiring and firing those who do. Their power to change the institution's management if it does not perform as they desire is what gives them control over policy. The boards exercise power not by popular demand or consensus, but by state charter. Incorporated by the state, they can call upon the courts and the police to enforce their decisions against the competing claims of staff, clients, or other constituents. These boards are non-elected, self-selected, self-perpetuating, ruling coteries of affluent persons who are answerable to no one but themselves. They are checked by no internal electoral system, no opposition parties, no obligation to report to the rank and file or win support from any of the people whose lives they affect with their decisions. Yet institutions so ruled, including the nation's news organizations, are said to be the mainstay of quote-unquote democratic pluralism. In a word, the cultural order is not independent of the business system, nor are cultural institutions independent of each other, being owned outright or directly controlled by the more active members of the business class in what amounts to a system of interlocking and often interchanging directorates. We know of more than one business leader who not only presides over a bank or corporation, but has served as a cabinet member in Washington, is a regent of a large university, a trustee of a civic arts center, and a board member of a church or foundation or major newspaper or television network, or all of the above. Yep, Biden has several such persons in his cabinet right now. Those persons who believe the United States is a pluralistic society resist the notion of a business-dominated culture. They see cultural institutions as standing outside the political arena, distinctly separate from business and politics. They make much about keeping the media, arts, sciences, foundations, schools, colleges, professions, and churches free of the taint of political ideologies, so that these institutions might not be deprived of their neutrality and autonomy. Since the pluralists believe that big business is just one of many interests in the political arena, and one that does not dominate the state, they cannot imagine that it dominates civil society and cultural life. But if history teaches us anything, it is that the power of the propertied class never stands alone. It wraps itself in the flag and claims a devotion to God, country, and the public good. Behind the state is a whole supporting network of doctrines, values, myths, and institutions that are not normally thought of as political, but which serve a political purposes. The state, as Gramsci noted, is only the outer ditch behind which there stands a powerful system of fortresses and earthworks. These supportive institutions help create the ideology that transforms a ruling class into a quote-unquote general interest, justifying existing class relations as the only natural and workable ones, the preferred and optimal, although not perfect, societal arrangements. So the capitalist class is the ruling class, controlling society's cultural institutions and ideational production, as well as its labor, land, and natural resources. Not entirely, however. The corporate financial class of America is very powerful but not omnipotent. It makes mistakes, suffers internal divisions over tactics and policies, and must constantly deal with the resistance of workers, consumers, taxpayers, voters, and other protesters. The ruling class rules, but not always in the way it might want. It sometimes must make concessions to resistant publics, or at least maintain an appearance of so doing. To best secure and legitimate its rule, it must minimize the appearance and use of its undemocratic coercive power. This hypocrisy is not merely, quote, the tribute that vice pays to virtue, unquote. In fact, vice never pays tribute to virtue, but it does to power. To the democratic power of the people, who with demonstrations, protests, boycotts, strikes, sit-ins, civil disobedience, and even civil disorders, have struggled against regressive laws, oppressive work conditions, excessive taxes, and foreign expansion of democratic rights and material benefits. The power of these democratic forces limits the ability of the moneyed interests to reduce all persons and things to grist for the profit mill. To maintain the system that is so good to them, the rich and powerful devote much attention to persuasion and propaganda. Control over the communication field and the flow of mass information helps secure the legitimacy of the owning class's politico-economic power. We don't have a free and independent press in the United States, but one that is tied by purchase and persuasion to wealthy elites and their government counterparts. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. Many people who hear about a quote-unquote controlled press think only of something that exists in other lands. If anything, the more conservative among them advocate greater restrictions on the U.S. media in imitation of the censorship they say they are fighting when they say they are fighting communism. Others who complain about the U.S. news media's shortcomings believe, quote, our press, unquote, for all its faults, is a free and independent one, certainly freer than in most countries. In this book, I chose to investigate the U.S. news media not by comparing them to the media of Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, France, Paraguay, Nazi Germany, or wherever, but by measuring them against their own assertions about being independent, objective, neutral, informative, balanced, and truthful. I will argue and try to demonstrate that in regard to the most crucial questions of political and economic life, the media do not and cannot live up to their claims, and I will try to explain how and why they fail to do so. The structures of control within the US media are different from the institutionalized formal censorship we might expect from a government-controlled press. They are less visible and more subtle, not monolithic yet hierarchical, transmitted to the many by those who work for the few, essentially undemocratic and narrow in perspective, tied to the rich and powerful but not totally immune to the pressures of an agitated public, propagandistic, yet sometimes providing hard information that is intentionally or unintentionally revealing. All right, let's pause for a moment there for discussion. Let's see, got some notes in here. So, yeah, like I mentioned, he basically gives a pretty good definition of bourgeois nationalism in this section, which is the deliberate conflation of the interests of the bourgeoisie with those of the nation as a whole. And the business class, the bourgeoisie always has the ear of the government, but the public has to work extra hard to get their voices heard.
All right, so Saber says this quote stood out to me. To best secure and legitimate its rule, it must minimize the appearance and use of its undemocratic coercive power. Too many people just unabashedly believe what the ruling class tells them. To best secure and legitimate its rule, it must minimize the appearance and use of its undemocratic coercive power. Too many people just unabashedly believe what the... So, Saber, do you think they're saying that the undemocratic apparatus that they can put to use to get whatever regressive agenda they use or want to push through? Do you think they're saying that they have to necessarily limit how often they do things that way so as to give the appearance of democracy? Or are they saying the other way, where they're quite literally always acting in an undemocratic way but must make it appear as such? Because I think it might lead toward the former. They're saying to give the appearance of democracy, we have to necessarily sometimes behave democratically, or at least give the appearance of democracy, so we can't too often use our coercive power, or people might necessarily start to call into question the legitimacy of the whole damn superstructure. What do you think, comrade? So Zoe says, yeah, that's why I mentioned to you, make sure you have the first edition, because there has been significant changes to the text in subsequent editions, and it seems to have softened the content. If this isn't, this is from the first pressing. The second pressing seems to be pretty different. Okay, yeah, if this is the first edition one, we'll keep using this one. Zoe, what were some of the big differences between the first and second edition that you remember?
So there's one section that was completely restructured. I think it's called The Limits of Orthodoxy in the second edition, and it's The Limits of Power in the first one, if I'm remembering correctly. So that section was restructured, and I think some content was removed that is really important. So, that's why I said we should go with this edition.
So, Cronkite and other critics. The U.S. news media, under an established ideology that claims they have no established ideology, no racial, gender, or class bias, supposedly committed to no persuasion. They just report things as they see them. That's that so-called neutrality bias. They claim they're neutral, but we all know that they're necessarily serving the interest of the bourgeois when they do reporting, but we can get into that as we read. So now and then we hear murmurs to the contrary. For instance, for nearly 2 decades, every evening in the week, the dean of America's newscasters, Walter Cronkite, would end his CBS television news show with the statement, "And that's the way it is." On the eve of retirement in 1980, Cronkite admitted that isn't the way it is. Quote, "My lips have been kind of buttoned for almost 20 years. CBS News doesn't really believe in commentary," he charged. It was a remarkable admission. The man who had been given honorary degrees by leading universities and who had been voted in one opinion poll the nation's most trusted public figure was saying that he had spent almost 2 decades under the censorship of network bosses. To be sure, it was a comfortable sort of repression. Cronkite's last 10-year contract with CBS went for $20 million, a sum that has been known to ease the pain of button lips. Jesus, $20 million to be a fucking media head. What the actual fuck? Okay, but finally, Walter Cronkite had his moment of truth. Yet he only complained and never explained. Why was he so restricted by those who exercise such power over him? That we think the American press is free and independent institution may only be a measure of our successful habituation to a subtler, more familiar form of suppression. The worst forms of tyranny, or certainly the most successful ones, are not those we rail against, but those that so insinuate themselves into the imagery of our consciousness and the fabric of our lives as not to be perceived as tyranny. This is not to say the press has escaped all criticism. Indeed, more frequently than ever, the media are under attack from various quarters. First, there are the salvos from political and religious alt-rightists. An example of the Christian right assault might be the televised sermon by fundamentalist preacher Jimmy Lee Swaggart from San Antonio, Texas on November 4th, 1984. Swaggart assailed the media as quote-unquote godless and infected by quote-unquote secular humanism, which he said was a code word for atheism. He said 40% of journalists are for socialism. Because of the media's undermining effects, we will, quote, rot from within without the Soviet Union having to fire a shot, he exclaimed. Having, close quote, quote-unquote, forgotten the Bible, the media will have difficulty, quote, recognizing what communism really is, close quote. We cooperated with the Soviets for a half a century, and all we got was a subterfuge, lying, darkness, and death, close quote. The communists in Nicaragua are, quote unquote, are slashing red paint on the doors of Christians, and quote, close quote. Then they'll go into every church and home and take out the people and preachers who then disappear. But our quote unquote leftist bureaucrats and weak-kneed sisters in Congress block any move against communism. The media corrode family values, weaken our moral fiber, and invite interior decay and the eventual victory of the communists, the preacher concluded. Swaggart's diatribe is mostly fantasy. However, we can see that from his ideological perspective, the media indeed do appear as atheistic, liberal, and soft on communism. I will try to show that while the media do not carry out the kind of fire and brimstone crusade against the quote-unquote evils of communism desired by the radical right, they are dedicated to anti-communism in a more effective and quite thorough fashion. Not too far from the right stands the conservative corporate community, which attacks the media for, quote, failing to show business's side of things, close quote, and for running occasional reports about corporate pollution, wasteful defense contracts, corporate crime, and the crimes of conservative political leaders. For example, Watergate. Business would prefer that the news media avoid any mention of the large profits that big business makes, especially embarrassing during hard times. Them godless commies, exactly, so. And stories about unemployment and the struggles of minorities, women, and the poor, and reports on those who protest armaments, nuclear power, and corporate mistreatment of the environment. All of this, along with TV dramas like Dynasty and Dallas, which occasionally portray individual tycoons as ruthless cutthroats, convinces corporate conservatives that the media are a liberal tool bent on portraying business in the worst possible light. These rightist attacks help the media maintain an appearance of neutrality and objectivity. The charge made by leftist critics that the media are complicit with the dominant powers seems to be refuted when these same powerful interests attack the media's supposedly anti-business bias. The truth is that while the press may not be totally uncritical nor totally adulatory toward the big business community, it is not an autonomous adversary independent of the corporate class. In fact, The media underplay most of the more damaging information and commentary about corporate doings. What is reported but the tip is but the tip of the iceberg. But even this is more than business cares to endure, and is seen as an attack on the entire business system. Corporate conservatives would prefer press dedicated to an exclusively laudatory, unblemished picture of American business, and complete with regular upbeat reports on the nation's economic, health, and business roles in creating an ever-expanding prosperity. So we could stop to talk about things for a second before we continue on. So he talks about how this, what was his name? Walter Cronkite. Was it Walter Cronkite? Swaggart thinks that the media is too soft on communism. But really, we see in very subtle ways that the media isn't soft on communism at all. It manufactures anti-communist consent and propaganda, in a more subtle fashion. So instead of just being like, evil commies all the goddamn time, they'll just quite literally do they'll do pro-business propaganda. So like they won't run stories about to the extent that they should about environmental damage being done by capitalism. They won't talk about 100 corporations being responsible for 70% of the carbon emissions or anything along those lines. They won't talk about workplace democracy and the material rights gained in any sort of socialist country, nothing along those lines, and in such a way, they're necessarily in a very subtle but not at all hard to see if you're looking for it method of doing anti-communism. So thinking of it from that standpoint, what are some and remember to type stack if you want to talk, what are some ways y'all can think of that anti-communism propaganda is prevalent in the media?
So I think especially prevalent right now, we see all sorts of stories sort of like lamenting America's supposed loss to China, which I think we all know sort of represents the very rich, moneyed interests in America, worried that some of their profits will, well, I say their profits, but they're stolen, of course, but some of the profits they receive will be lower because of gains made by the Chinese. And then, we can see how that enters the society in a broad sort of there's just a lot of different ways that it hits. So we see all this rising anti-Asian violence, or we see I saw this weird news story today that was America no longer has the population lead, just really weird stuff like that. And it's just, these stories seem to think of themselves as entirely neutral, because was said earlier about how it's just not challenged, it's just an accepted part of what is neutral. It's totally bizarre when you start really thinking about it, but it's also very easy to just, we live in this propaganda, so it's very easy to just passively accept it and accept all of these honestly heinous ideas.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. And I mean, and like I said, they end up doing it in a way that necessarily serves the interest of imperialism too, because you get to the point. What was that quote from Black Shirts and Reds, something about an unfalsifiable orthodoxy, where not only do they spread propaganda to be able to do whatever agenda they want to do is, but I think, Zoe mentioned that. That's from Black Shirts and Reds, non-falsifiable orthodoxy, where they quite literally, any kind of scenario that could possibly be happening in a communist country, they will paint as bad. If the churches are full, that is because people need a safe haven from communism. If the churches are not full, that's just evidence of atheistic repression. If the government's taking care of people, it's trying to get people reliant on communism. If it's not taking care of people, this is communism's inability to take care of people, and so on and so forth. So when you combine that with what it's not shining a light on under communism or under capitalism, not only the growing wealth inequality, which they hardly ever talk about, not only the rampant imperialism, but just straight up just not reporting on the everyday doings of these or of these corrupt corporations, then you can start to see exactly what sort of picture they was to paint for you. And it's not at all a pro-communist agenda. If anything, it's an extremely anti-communist agenda. So that's a really good point you brought up, Comrade Dictionary. Saber said, not sure if this is related, but I'm reminded about researching the apartheid, and I noticed that a lot of mainstream outlets either downplayed or ignored the Cuba alliances in Africa. I mean, how do you talk about what Cuba is doing in Africa as a capitalist without just straight up shining a light on all the good that Cuba does, from the sharing of its resources to helping send teachers and doctors to other countries, to putting troops on the ground in other countries consensually so that they can help fight back against apartheid, and any number of different ways that the revolutionary government of Cuba helped to aid Africa. How the fuck does a capitalist even talk about it without ending up having to talk about, just how good communism has been in terms of building it, in some of these countries? It says everything about the power of building socialism and trending toward communism, that under the brutal embargoes that Cuba and the DPRK exist under, that they managed to still exist at all. Capitalism could never help a country survive the brutality that those countries had inflicted upon them by the U.S. and by other imperial powers, especially not in the case of the DPRK. So that's a good point, Saber. Zoe says, Cuba lets African students study medicine for free as long as they practice in their home country for a certain number of years. Which, how can you say that's anything other than just a straight up good thing? But these capitalists, they would like to be able to spin it, but there's no way where you can spin that to people and they don't immediately find themselves calling it bullshit, because to be against something like that would just obviously be bullshit. So that's a good point, Comrade Zoe. Jamie says, a Chinese rocket is going to fall down from the sky and crush you specifically and your family. It's so huge it's scary. Worry about it. It's Chinese, by the way. Yeah, that's exactly how ridiculous their propaganda sounds. And most of the time, their propaganda doesn't have anything to do with any kind of material reality about the countries that they're spreading bullshit against. They'll talk about supreme dictator, Kim Jong-un, for example, as if the government structure there works that way at all. But we would actually have to engage materially with other countries to know that you're being lied to about those countries. And America is working from the premise that not enough people give enough of a shit to do reading and do any kind of research. But we got 400 people in bread theory, so I think we're proving that people are willing to are interested in and willing to learn alternatives to the media bullshit that they've been fed, if you're willing to present it to them in a way that's not condescending and talking down to them. So that's good shit. Let's continue reading.
Not all the criticisms is from political, religious, and corporate conservatives. Centrists and liberals, including some journalists, have criticized the press for failing to do its job of informing the American public about the crucial issues. Criticism from those on the political center focuses less on content than on the lack of it. They complain that the news is superficial and trivial and that it focuses on personalities rather than issues, on surface happenings rather than substantive matters, that it is more interested in entertaining than informing us. I agree with such observations, and in the pages ahead will offer supporting examples, but that kind of criticism remains more of a complaint than an analysis. When the centrists and liberal critics get around to trying to explain why stories are so poorly reported, they are likely to blame the journalists. The Columbia Journalism Review and other such publications run articles telling how stories are mishandled because reporters are misled by their sources, not well informed, too dependent on officialdom, or given to indulging their personal predilections and prejudices. These kinds of criticisms are often true, but they place too much blame on the weakest, lowliest link in the news manufacturing chain, the reporter. The critics say nothing about the editors who cut and rewrite the reporter's copy and who control their jobs, and they say nothing about the people who hire, fire, pay, and promote the editors and who exercise ultimate control over them. The centrist liberal critique fails to note that while the journalist's product may be gravely wanting in certain qualities, including objectivity and balance, it remains acceptable to the journalist's superiors. It is the kind of copy they deem suitable for their readers, and, as will be seen, the reporter who produces more penetrating stories, especially ones that reveal too much about the exploitative, undemocratic nature of capitalist society at home and abroad, will run into difficulties with superiors. By fingering the journalists as the main or only culprit, liberal critics are implicitly treating reporters as free agents when in fact they are not. The working press works for someone other than itself.
So they'll talk about the reporter. They'll say stuff like, oh, they're just doing the bidding of their boss. They're just doing the bidding of the establishment, which, necessarily plays out true. But at first glance, this comes off as a substantive analysis of like how good a job the media is doing. But actually, it's a weak critique of the material conditions that necessarily lead to these people behaving in this way. It's real easy to, Jake Tapper is weak, Don Lemon is weak, etc. Like anybody can say that and get clicks for fucking saying it. It's an entirely another thing to actually challenge the superstructure that hires these people in the first place, that are looking for people who won't rock the boat too much, who are likely to be beholden, to the powers that be in their place of employment. Because, these motherfuckers, to a certain extent, are still working class people who need to hold on to their fucking jobs like we do. Not necessarily, they have a kind of different relationship to capitalism than your average proletarian, because they are necessarily helping to do some of the bidding that, or a lot of the bidding that ends up reinforcing the prosperity of capitalism, or the gospel of capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, so to speak. But just stopping your criticism at like, oh, the reporters need to do better and they need to like have a backbone and shit. It's just like, okay, but what the fuck have you even actually said? Because you've not called out at all the people who necessarily make them feel like they have to do their reporting in a certain way. So really, you're saying nothing at all, in those kind of scenarios. And that's what Parenti is making me think about as we go through this. Let me see if anybody said anything before I continue. They are weak by design. Their rhetoric fits what the establishment needs out of its media. Exactly. Zoe says he's going to show us the leash the reporters are kept on later in the book. Hell yeah. That's good shit. Sometimes media critics will fault not the journalist or anyone else involved in manufacturing the news, but the structure of the media themselves. By its very nature, we are told television emphasizes the visual over the ideation. Okay, it's a mouthful. Action events, national leaders, and political candidates have visual appeal. Issues and policy analysis do not. Hence, there is bound to be more surface than substance in the news. The problem also is said to exist to a lesser extent with the print media, which have limited space and time to frame vastly complex events on a daily basis. So it is said the media latch on to simple images and explanations in order to reduce their subject matter to easily manageable components. There is no denying that stereotyping and reductionism are the common tools of shallow thinking, but why must such shallowness be treated as inevitable? That the media so frequently resort to slick surface treatment does not mean such treatment is the only way the media can function. Rather than being a criticism, this blaming the nature of the media is a disguised defense. It gets everyone off the hook and treats television or whatever media like a disembodied technological force all its own. However, it is not television as such that chooses to cling to surface events, but the people who run it. With the right script and right intentions, visual media can offer engrossingly informative and penetrating presentations on vital subjects, as demonstrated by the many fine, independently produced documentaries the major networks deign not to carry. In contrast to the above views, I argue that the news media do not fail to do their job. Rather, they perform their function all too well. Jeez, how many different arms of the fucking state do we keep saying this about? That they're not failing, they're doing their job perfectly. Anyways, their objective is not to produce an alert, critical, and informed citizenry, but the kind of people who will vote for Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, or Ronald Reagan. Damn. Their aim is to create the kind of opinion climate that makes such choices seem plausible. An opinion universe dominated by corporate and governmental elites, almost all of whom share the same ideological perspective about political and economic reality. True, these elites do not always appreciate how well they are served by a press that would be less credible or less effective if it were exclusively and more blatantly a propaganda arm of business and government. But this does not mean the press is free and independent. The basic distortions in the media are not innocent errors, for they are not random. Rather, they move in the same overall direction again and again, favoring management over labor, corporatism over anti-corporatism, the affluent over the poor, private enterprise over socialism, whites over blacks, males over females, officialdom over protesters, conventional politics over dissidents, anti-communism and arms race militarism over disarmament, national chauvinism over internationalism. Jesus Christ, he's spitting. U.S. dominance of the third world over revolutionary change. The press does many things and serves many functions, but its major role, its irreducible responsibility, is to continually create a power of reality supportive of existing social and economic class power. That is what I will try to demonstrate in this book. All right, so let's talk about what we were just reading there a little bit, because he was saying some very important shit. Let me scroll back up real quick. Yeah, Zoe actually just quoted the part that I thought was the most important part of the whole thing. Quote, their objective is not to produce an alert, critical, and informed citizenry, but the kind of people who will vote for Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, or Ronald Reagan. Their aim is to create the kind of opinion climate that makes such choices seem plausible. An opinion universe dominated by corporate and governmental elites, almost all of whom share the same ideological perspective about political and economic reality. So, the question then necessarily becomes, what kind of person would vote for Jimmy Carter, or Richard Nixon, or Ronald Reagan, or Bill Clinton? And I'm wondering if he's going to paint a picture for what this kind of person is. Because when I think about it from the standpoint of liberals exist to protect the interest of capitalism. Liberals are people who exist to protect the interest of capitalism. These people are what we would call capitalism defenders, with fascism itself being capitalism in decay, and being the reason why liberals are so prone to becoming goddamn fascist. We can then start to see exactly what the appeal of these people are. These people have the kind of appeal. We're talking about the Reagans and the Carters and the Nixons, who necessarily appeal to different aspects of what makes capitalism supposedly appealing to people. You got your Carter, who appeals to the small business types, the wholesome, Southern people image that they wants to paint of a person who is just like soft-spoken and gentlemanly and just wants to like improve the lot, of the small business owner. You got Nixon, who is more aggressive and bombastic and outspoken, and that is when he was healthy, necessarily how he presented. You got Reagan, who is necessarily the kind of person who presents an image of conservative strength, nation over everything except God, who appeals to these more evangelical sorts, who appeals to these sort of people who are looking for people who both love God and and have a strong love of country to an almost unquestioning sense of what the country is doing, So then when you look to how the media Yeah, the compassionate conservative. They're looking for people who can necessarily appeal to different demographics of working class people at different times. So then you can start to see exactly what it is in the media. So now the media, what did the media not like about Donald Trump? Bombastic, rude, mean tweets, vulgar, all these different things that just kind of go against the image. And if he was bombastic while also being kind, they would have called him a revolutionary. These are the kind of words that would have been used a lot about Donald fucking Trump. But since he necessarily acted in a way that made them feel as if he mismanaged empire and mismanaged the imperial construct, the imperial core, that's what they didn't like about him. But if you put the same traits on people who stay off of Twitter, don't do the mean tweets, and are just more subtle about their imperialism, they'll be singing that person's praises too. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. All right. So class, race, and gender. One indication of how the press serves the privileged and the powerful is found in how it treats the underprivileged and the powerless. The news media are largely an affluent white male domain. Blacks, Latinos, Asians, women, and the poor are accorded brief mention on special occasions. The poor are most likely to receive coverage during Thanksgiving and Christmas time, when some indigents are administered turkey dinners, the message being that there is comfort food and shelter even for the more fortunate among us. With the Reagan cutbacks in human services in the recession of 1982 and 1983, the poor, especially the so-called new poor, became an object of media interest for brief intermittent spans. By 1984, with hunger and homelessness as bad as ever, the media hit upon a new thing: economic recovery. Although the number of Americans living in poverty had increased from 25 million to 35 million between 81 and 85, the media tended to lose interest in the poor. Women account for only about 10% of persons in the news, usually appearing as celebrities or the wives of celebrities or unusual first. The first woman astronaut, the first woman on the Supreme Court, the first woman vice presidential candidate for a major party. But the more general battle for economic, social, and sexual equality and for material survival and betterment that women are waging on many fronts is ignored or slighted. So with blacks and other minorities who struggle for jobs, decent housing, safe neighborhoods, viable political organizations, and adequate medical care, and whose cultural contributions to and attempts to win fair play in sports, art, literature, entertainment, music, religion, labor, and education have received little notice from the white media. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, Fleckton says. Yeah, that's how exactly it happens. Let's keep bombing them, but let's put Kamala Harris's face on it. That's the way. This is the way. Whose cultural contributions to and attempts to win fair play in sports, art, literature, entertainment, music, religion, labor, and education have received little notice from the white media. The black candidate who attracts millions of votes in presidential primaries while taking a progressive stance on issues is likely to win unsympathetic or sliding press treatment, as did Jesse Jackson in 1984. Women, blacks, and other minorities are also drastically underrepresented as employees in the communication industry. The first woman astronaut was actually from the USSR and happened decades earlier than what was lauded in the US, Valentina Tereshkova in the 60s, nearly 2 decades before Sally Ride. Nah, comrade, the US got to decide what meant winning the space race was, and so even though they lost on every metric that could ever conceivably matter, they said that getting to the moon means that they won the space race. So bringing up all that other shit, comrade, that's irrelevant. I don't even know what you're doing that for. You got to listen to what the U.S. says. The U.S. said they had to get to the moon to win. So bringing up the fact that they were the first people to put a female on the moon, or in space rather. That's totally irrelevant. That doesn't mean anything at all. The class dimensions of give me a sec. Women, blacks, and other minorities are also drastically underrepresented as employees in the communication industry. According to former Boston Globe editor Thomas Winship, the majority of the 1,700 daily newspapers in the United States have never employed a single black, Latino, or Asian American journalist. Wow, that's wild as fuck. And this is as of when? When did he write Inventing Realities, though? Barely 5% of all employed professional journalists are people of color, and most of these work for the handful of minority-owned publications and radio stations. Likewise, women account for only 6.5% of all reporters. In these kind of statistics, black, Chicano, Asian, and other minority women are usually counted twice, as women and as minorities. The class dimensions of the women's struggle and the black struggle, and indeed the systemic class dimensions of poverty itself, are judged to be simply not a fit subject for the mainstream news media. Equality is seen as a matter of individual achievement that has no collective material base. Class as an exploitative relationship between owners and employees, and as a determinant of wealth and power, is a subject the news media dare not touch. However, class as a designation of occupation, income with lifestyle wins occasional recognition with such references as middle class, low income, upper middle, professional class, white collar, and blue collar. First edition is 1986. Jesus Christ. So as of 1986, most major publications were not. So the majority of the 1,700 daily newspapers had not employed a black person, a Latino person, or an Asian American journalist. Like, that's recent fucking memory, for fuck's sake. That's wild as hell. All right. Consider how class biases operate and how crimes are reported, and in what is even defended as a crime. Press coverage focuses public attention on crime in the streets, with scarcely a mention of crime in the suites. He thinks he's a fucking poet. All right. Downplaying such corporate crimes as briberies, embezzlements, kickbacks, monopolistic restraints of trade, illegal uses of public funds by private interests, occupational safety violations, unsafe consumer goods, and environmental poisonings, which are or should be crimes and which can cost the public dearly in money and lives. Every year, more than 14,000 workers in the U.S. are killed on the job. Another 100,000 die prematurely, and 400,000 become seriously ill from work-related diseases. Many, if not most, of these deaths and injuries occur because greater consideration is given by management to profits and production than to occupational safety and environmental standards. Yet these crimes are rarely defined and reported as crimes by the news media. Typically they count it. They not only do they not talk about it as a crime by the corporation, they'll paint some of these things as personal responsibility on behalf of the victim. They'll say stuff like, well, they should have told somebody that they were feeling under the weather, or they should have told somebody that they weren't well, and blah, 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 all this other horse shit that necessarily deflects who the fucking problem is when something at work happens in the first place. It's wild. Too young to remember 9/11. Jesus, Jamie. Don't rub it in our faces. How the press defines and reports on crime then is... Give me my tapioca, motherfucker. How the press defines and reports on crime then is largely determined by the class and racial background of the victim and victimizer. Affluent victims are more likely to receive press attention than poor ones, leaving the false impression that most victims of crime are from upper and middle class backgrounds. And low-income lawbreakers, especially blacks, Latinos, and other minorities, are more likely to be publicized as criminals than the corporate leaders whose crimes may be even more serious and of wider scope and repercussion than the street criminals. While the press reports occasional abuses in the economic system, it treats corporate capitalism as fostering individual initiative and inventiveness, and as being providential rather than exploitative. The contradictions of capitalism, for instance, between the need to keep wages down in order to maximize profits and the need to keep wages up in order to maintain demand, are seldom, if ever dwelt upon in the media. The waste, duplication, stagnation, unemployment, inflation, and anarchy of production that comes with an unplanned economy and the failure of a market economy to respond to social need rather than private greed. This nigga think he a fucking poet. Jesus. Are seldom linked to anything in the nature of capitalism. Recessions are treated as natural, albeit unfortunate events, somewhat akin to earthquakes or droughts, caused by something innocent called hard times. as if so-called hard times don't have their own material explanation, huh? Inflation and pollution are supposedly caused by everyone, since we all spend and consume. One television reporter put it this way: inflation is the culprit, and in inflation, everyone is guilty. In the news media, slums are caused by people who live in them and not by real estate speculators, fast buck developers, tax evading investors, and rent gouging landlords. Poverty is a problem of the poor, who need to be taught better values and a more middle-class lifestyle. While the poor are always with us, for the media, it is the middle class to which America belongs. The middle class is implicitly virtuous because it is seen as the repository of stability and order. Thus, on CBS Evening News, anchor person Dan Rather referred to the 17,000 to 41,000 range as the great middle class, the glue that holds society together. The press does not link poverty, instability, and disorder to the injustices and irrationalities of the capitalist system. So we can stop with the reading for this week there, y'all. There's a lot to talk about there. Let me check the chat real quick. That's a hell of a fucking range. Two Hit Good said 17,000 to 41,000. Now, mind you, this is the 80s. You know, inflation is a thing. We understand that, you know, the value of money necessarily increases and decreases under certain economic conditions. That's all well and good. But this idea that a $17,000 worker is making is a middle class person, like, even being kind enough to imagine inflation having something to do with that just sounds like bullshit. And thus the other strata of the proletariat are obscured except when they're being portrayed as criminals, and the big bourgeoisie are fucking invisible. Oh yeah, these motherfuckers never imagined the idea that the criminals in Wall Street are anywhere near as bad as the criminals who make up working class neighborhoods, who shouldn't even be thought of as criminals, but necessarily victims of a society that put them in a position where criminality is a better alternative to literal death. But, you know, you'd have to be willing to analyze material situations for that to be your perspective. So we can't have that. 17K would be 41K today. 41K in 1985 is roughly 100K today. Imagine making 100K and thinking that you're anything other than, I mean, I suppose if you're making 100K but you're not a capital owner, we can't necessarily call you bourgeois, but you're sure as hell bourgeois adjacent. You're sure as hell more vulnerable to having sympathies against the working class than you are for them. And honestly, these are not the kind of people who we should ever do anything but look at with an eye raised if they're talking about, I make this much, but I'm still middle class. Like, what the actual fuck? I mean, I suppose there's regions of the country where you can make that kind of money and still, you know, be struggling in some ways. You know, the housing market in California, for example. But I don't know. You're making $100,000 and you complaining to me about your financial woes. You're gonna have to cry me a fucking river. I'm sorry. Arbitrarily raising prices is only possible if you have a monopoly, so it's not uncommon in the area of imperialism. Commie rice.
So on that note, My new job, I make pretty close to that much, and
To 100K?
yeah, which is absurd to me. It's so much more than I've ever made in my life. I like literally, when I was interviewing, they like told me the range, and I was like, oh, if you pay me 100,000, I'll start right away. And then they like thought I was being serious, which I had not anticipated. But it's like, it's so much money. Like, I don't understand anybody who's like all those fucking weird articles about like people making like 250,000, but they have 3 kids, so they can't afford anything. And I'm like, what? I don't like. What do you spend your money on? It's absurd. Like, it's so much. Like, I don't need this much. Like, I've already like started like giving a lot of it away, because like, what the fuck would I do with that?
Yeah,
So like
give me $1,000 if that's the case. Then shit. But no, seriously, comrade, what's the cost of living in your area?
I mean, I live like 2 miles from Detroit. It is not particularly high.
You don't need $100,000 to live where
I don't. Like, I live in a like a kind of like an affluent little suburb. Not like super affluent, but like it's expensive enough to live here, and like it's never a problem, you know? And I don't get people who are like that stretched on even more than me. Like, it blows my mind. Like, that's a ton of fucking money.
Yeah. So like how do you even go about, because you're still working, but you're very much, do you feel like that kind of money necessarily compromises your class interest?
I think about it a lot, actually. I wonder, like, it must. It must in some way. It's just, it's hard to see it when it's happening to you, you know? But like, it's got to. And I always wonder, like, when it comes time, am I going to be too liberalized to make the moves that are necessary? It's like a significant concern I think about a lot. And I don't really know what you do. But it certainly changed my thoughts on like labor aristocracy stuff. Like, I was sort of on the fence before, but now I 100% think it's a real thing because I'm part of it. And like, being able to see that is like, yeah, clearly there's a layer of workers, at least in the West, that are totally bought off.
That's fucking wild. Yeah. So like, these people are technically still working class, but not at all.
Yeah, like I don't own any means of production or like anything like that, but like, my material day to day is so different from like people who even live like 4 miles from me, you know? Like, it's like we live in a different world.
Just because you make what you make, even though you're still needing to work. Because if you stop working tomorrow, you know, or even for the rest of the year, how would that necessarily affect you? Like, you'd be in a position where you need to get back to work pretty quickly, wouldn't you?
Yeah, like I couldn't. I mean, I just started, so we don't have like significant savings or anything, and my partner is like possibly going to get fired for union organizing.
Oh shit.
So it's like, it would be like a significant problem if I lost my job now. But like, it's also wildly different than if I were like working at McDonald's, you know? Like, it doesn't take me anywhere near as long to save up. In fact, someone stuck working at McDonald's probably can't at all. And that's a thing I can think about. Like, I'm afforded a lot of things that most people are not.
Yeah, that's real shit.
And it like, I have to like think about it a lot, like constantly, because I don't want to. I don't want to be like a lot of people that are in my industry who have absolutely abhorrent ideas about the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's so you're a computer engineer, right?
Well, what I do is security. I'm a cloud security analyst.
Okay.
Which is like a pretty. I mean, it's not super niche because cloud stuff is important now, but there's like not a lot of people who can do it. So it like works out for me, but only as long as seen as valuable, you know.
I feel you.
I mean, there's already this huge push in tech broadly where they're pretending like there's not enough people for jobs, so
Yeah.
They have to like lower all the requirements for like these specific kind of work visas to like try to pit us against immigrants as though that's some sort of like a big thing. But like, why would I care that someone is going to come from like India or whatever and be able to do my job? My company makes like hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Like, they can afford it. I don't care.
Yeah, they literally can. That's good shit. I'm glad you made us think about it. Emily's on the stack. What would you want to say, Emily?
I was just gonna pipe in because I'm kind of surrounded by the same type of people who make that kind of 100,000 a year. Just that's the family I grew up in, and the ones that I find who are more self-aware, it's kind of interesting the cognitive dissonance that they have, because I know a lot of my more intuitive cousins, for example, who make good money, are afraid, but they're also afraid to learn why they're afraid. It's interesting to watch them like try to square up what they know about the world with their position in it. It's interesting to watch. They're the ones I focus on the most when I'm trying to get them to read stuff like this and to engage with me in socialism, communism discussions. But it's interesting because they don't want to hear it sometimes. They just don't want to hear the information.
Okay, so like how do you typically, like, what's a conversation with these people like? How do you talk to them?
I usually just push back when they say something ridiculous. Like, I don't know, I have family members who are like, I think Biden has done, like, kept all his promises. And I'm like, what fucking promises has he kept? Yeah. And they're just like, no, I don't want to talk politics with you.
So that's the kind of shit they'll say, right? They're the kind of people who would agree when like the squad was saying like, oh, Joe Biden's been doing better than expected. And I think it was Pramila Jayapal that like says, yeah, they give Biden an A. Like, these are those kind of people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They
get the feel goods from some of the more performative aspects, and but when they want to actually get into the knee deep on what would actually be a better world, justice, actual justice instead of performative justice, they don't tend to go deeper. And I don't know, I think it's probably a twofold of not wanting to know and also just being too comfortable to actually engage. Like, they're keeping their comfort by not engaging.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But at that point, all you can really do is just, you either find an end with these people and try to talk to them along that line, or you just kind of say, these people can't be reached, and you necessarily don't spend time trying to radicalize them. There are definitely folks out there who just, until they have started asking the right questions, there's not even anything you can do to help them other than just like, you could try to be a presence in their life to the extent that you can, but you can't really do anything from them from a radical standpoint, unfortunately. And that's just kind of the way it is. It kind of sounds like they're in that boat of, they're not even asking the right questions. So how the fuck are you supposed to give them the right answers? These people are not wrestling with imperialism or anything like that.
The one thing I do is just talk about stuff that's actually like bullshit, but I usually do it in kind of an underhanded kind of way. Like, we'll be watching the news. Sometimes it really depends. If I'm in a bad mood, I'm really blunt about it. But if I'm in a good mood, I will be just saying little things about stuff I hear in the news, or if we're watching some stupid ad that has some harmful messages in it, I might just quietly say something about it, just like off the cuff.
I got you. That makes sense. Just kind of picking your spot.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense. So, y'all, it was a good session. We definitely learned a lot about just exactly what the media gets up to in terms of whose interests they're really protecting and what their job is. Parenti did a good job so far in his first half of chapter 1, kind of establishing that their job is, as though quoted earlier, to create the kind of people who would vote for Reagan or Carter or Nixon, etc. So next week we'll be able to continue and see exactly what he means more in detail when we finish chapter 1. And I look forward to doing that with y'all. Hopefully we can get to our second half of the DPRK presentation this Monday. I'm still not feeling well, so I'll let y'all know if that ends up getting put off again. But we're gonna get through it sooner rather than later. So I'll let y'all know. Other than that, solidarity, comrades. Y'all know I love y'all. We'll get this edited and up on YouTube in the next few days. Until we meet again, y'all take care. Peace.